This story begins in 1997, when after 6 years and 2 degrees, I graduated from the University of Virginia. And I was itching for an adventure. I decided to celebrate my graduation with a trip. And I chose Africa because after 6 years at a predominantly white institution, hearing things like, you're only here because of affirmative action, you're a quota, go back to Africa, I was worn down. And so I thought, yeah, Africa, I'll find my people. So I saved for a year, and with a generous scholarship from the National Outdoor Leadership School, I took off for a month in Kenya. I thought that I would land in the motherland and be welcomed with open arms. In America, I acted too white for the black folks, too black for the white folks, and so I thought in this Goldilocks-esque fit of inspiration that in Africa, I might be just right. Only to find out that in Africa, me and all of my peers were merely considered crazy, rich Americans who had left behind perfectly good jobs, homes, and families to sleep in tents halfway around the world. They often referred to us as turtles due to our wrinkled clothes and our giant backpacks. Our ragtag group of 15 hired a local Maasai guide named Robert. He was 6 feet, sinewy muscle, but he had the kindest eyes and a blinding smile. Robert was our bridge to the Maasai culture and customs. He introduced us to his family and his friends, his village, his home. And on our first day in the village, a group of women sat and decided they were going to make us chai, but were dismayed to discover that they didn't have enough sugar to suit our uniquely American sweet tooths. And so in a gesture that I will never forget, one of these women sent her son, who couldn't have been more than 10 years old, on a 2-mile round-trip run to a neighboring village to get sugar. And he did it in under 20 minutes and arrived with a smile, and suddenly we were having tea in Africa. Robert's friends and family were generous to us in so many ways. They shared their language, teaching us the basics of Swahili. They let us observe and taught us about Tadumu, which is the traditional jumping dance of the Maasai, which many of you might be familiar with. And we learned that this jumping dance actually had a practical purpose. The highest jumper was often seen as the strongest member of the village, and that member ultimately would become chief. And in this case, the chief of the village was Robert's eldest brother. They shared the same twinkling eye and warm smile, but they couldn't have been more different otherwise. Robert was more serious, his brother gregarious, and I got to see this in action when his brother asked me, how many cows would my father require from my hand in marriage? I told him that my father was a computer nerd who lived on a quarter acre of land in Virginia, and that I didn't think that livestock would work. I asked him, how many wives do you already have? And he said 3. I told him that I was the jealous and petty type, and that I didn't like to share. But I enjoyed meeting his wives and their children, and suspending my judgment and basking in the warmth of their welcome and acceptance. Robert's brother would refer to our group as Wate Wenye Mizigo, and his friends and family would just crumble in laughter. And we did too, when they finally told us on our last day with the village that it stood for people with luggage looking for trouble. I left Kenya 4 weeks later, I was stranded in the Nairobi airport due to a 13-hour flight delay. I was exhausted but happy, battling that mix of melancholy and homesickness that's familiar to frequent travelers. The airport was packed, so I sat on the floor with my back against a wall and changed the batteries in my MP3 player. As day turned to night, a young woman with 3 children sat across from me, and she wore a traditional hijab, and she smiled shyly as she watched over her brood. I played the world's longest game of peekaboo with her baby boy. Around dinner time, she began to produce these greasy but heavenly smelling bags from her purse. And as she laid out these containers of food for her children, she looked up and smiled and waved me over. And in the universal sign of no thank you, I just shook my head. But she wouldn't take no for an answer. She sent her oldest over with one of these small greasy bags. He couldn't have been more than 8, and I realized she wasn't more than my own 24 years. But here she was, a mother with responsibilities, commitments, a magical purse full of food. And we shared no language, but she reached across the divide to take the most basic care of another human being. She took food from her own children's bellies for a stranger. She reached out across language, culture, religion, and lifestyle to care for a stranger. That was 20 years ago this year, and I remember it vividly. I left Africa in August of 1997, and I vowed 2 things. The first was that I would never again allow anyone else to tell me who I was. My heritage, my culture, my potential were mine to define. Affirmative action, quotas, and perceptions be damned. And second, I vowed that somehow, some way, and someday, I would make somebody feel the way the people of Africa had made me feel. Welcome, seen, accepted, a part of, not apart from. That chance came 2 years ago when in the summer of 2015, I heard that Dartmouth College was hosting 30 young African leadership fellows. We call them YALI fellows here. And they were on campus for the summer, and I heard that they didn't have any plans for the 4th of July. And so I told my colleagues that we would love to have them join us. My wife and I were already planning a cookout for family and friends. I was excited. I set about ordering sparklers and glow sticks, miniature American flags, red, white, and blue everything. The masterpiece was this huge Happy 4th of July sheet cake. I didn't want them to just feel welcome. I wanted them to feel worthy of our best, our most, and our all. As our guests began to arrive, I realized I had neglected one thing. When my wife looked out of the kitchen window over the driveway, turned to me and said, "Is that a," and I finished the sentence, "microbus full of Africans?" Yes, it was. I had neglected to tell her that I had invited all of these extra people. Fortunately, she's amazing and forgave me. And we had a great time. We invited the YALI fellows to join us in horseshoes and volleyball. We lit citronella candles. We made s'mores. And then we wished them well as they headed off to watch 4th of July fireworks, telling them that they were welcome back to our home anytime. These are words that I've heard so many times in so many villages and cities and homes around the world. And finally, I got to say them to someone else. And so, in this time of division and ignorance and hatred and fear, my hope for all of us is that we can learn to give and receive the gifts of radical hospitality and inclusion, even if it might be spurned, because we need it and each other now more than ever. As a passionate traveler, I hope that all of you will have the opportunity to continue to wander, but also to welcome. But most of all, I hope that you will ever be people with luggage looking for trouble. Thank you.